Hi there, crafty friends. Welcome and thank you for joining me. My name is Melissa, and today I thought we would make a more masculine type card using Honeybee Stamp's Big Pickup Tailgate stamp, die, and stencils. So I need a couple masculine cards. I know girls drive trucks too. I also drove a truck for a long time, but I am making these for a couple guy friends. So let's go ahead and get started. We will be using the tailgate. There is also a cab stamp set, but we are not going to use that today. I thought this would be easier. I just want to have something. It's not going to be super fancy. It will be a little bit more plain. And I'm just using my Honeybee Intense Black because that is alcohol marker friendly. They also have the cab, but I thought this tailgate would be quicker and easier. It's going to be relatively simple, but it will still have a nice little message, and it'll still be a nice card because we are going to do this as a shaped card. So that's good. I'm going to leave my stamp in there because we will restamp. And now all we need to do is get started coloring. So I am going with greens. I've got my Copic markers, and I've got YG17 and G28. G28 is my darker green. I am going to start with that first. So I'm just going to kind of come over on the edges. I'm not doing super fancy coloring. I'm just going to flick some color on there. Then we can come in with our lighter green, and I am just going to blend that out. And I do turn my piece quite often when I'm coloring. I think that's pretty good there. And then we can move on to our other fender. And for all my coloring today, I'm just doing flicking around the edge with my darker color, and then I will come in with my lighter green and I will blend that color in. And you want to make sure, I've got a couple samples I'll show you at the end. You want to make sure that you have a lot of ink in your Copics. If they're running a little dry, you're not going to get a good blend because these are larger areas. And then I will just get that darker ink moving and get some nice shading in there. So now I'll come in with my darker, and I'm going to do this larger tailgate area here. And I'm just repeating the process, kind of flicking that ink. Then I'll go on the top just a little bit, just a thinner line, not too heavy. Then bring in that lighter, and we can blend that ink. Then we'll move on to another area. Let's do our cab. And I think I started to say earlier, I didn't realize that this stamp set had been out for so long. I just recently got it the beginning of the year, and I didn't realize that it's been out for almost 4 years. So I wanted to use this before it got retired and make a couple cards. And this is a very simple card. It is time consuming with the coloring, but I think it'll be so worth it in the end. And I do always start with my darker color first. Some people start with the lighter color first, but I do prefer to use my darker first. And then I'll just blend that with my lighter green and just take your time around those windows. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Now let's move on to the area around our tailgate. And I am going to do the two sides and then the area around the main tailgate completely dark green. And do take a little care when going around that license plate and that fender, because those will be lighter and we don't want to get any of our dark green in there. I think that looks pretty good. Now we will do the main portion of our tailgate. the same way. I'm just flicking those areas to get that dark ink on there. Then I'll bring in my dark or my lighter, and we will just blend those colors. I think that's probably pretty good. We will be covering up that tailgate with a greeting. So now I want to do this little section right here. So we've got our bumper, and I want to do that little section right below it. And we are all done with our greens. So now I am bringing in my stencils, and we've got 2 in one pack, and they are clearly marked at the top. One says cab and one says tailgate. So we will be using these. And I've got some inks here. I am going to be using sky blue for my windows, and then we are going to start with rocky slope for our fenders. But let's do our windows first, and we'll just line those up. I'm not even going to use a grip mat. I am just going to line those up and add a little bit of color in there. Then we can do our front window. Actually, I don't know if we're seeing through the rear window to the front window, and we'll just add some color in there. That looks pretty good. It does not need to be perfect. And then let's do our little mirrors here. For those, we will use a little bit of rocky slope, and I don't want it too terribly dark. Just add a little bit there and a little bit there. Then we can bring this down and do our bumpers. And again, I don't want it to be too terribly dark. I'm going to go a little bit darker on the outside and have it a little bit lighter on the inside. Then we can come down and do the undercarriage. And I am going to use a little bit of tape just to hold that in place. And here we will go a little heavier handed. That looks good. And then we've got our little tail lights here. For my tail light, I am going to use a little bit of candy apple, but I think I've still got some on my brush. We will also be covering up these areas, but I just want to put a little bit of color down there. There we go. I did need to add a little bit more color to my brush. Now I will wipe this off just because I don't want to get red on anything else. So now we can do our rear view mirror, and I'll just use the rest of the rocky slope that I have on my brush. And then also our license plate. You know, I think I want my license plate to have a little hint of light blue. So I'll bring back in that sky blue brush. I'm just going to use what's left on the brush. So that was our tailgate stencil. Now I am going to bring in the cab stencil because my tires are on the cab stencil. So I've taped that down so it doesn't move. And then I am also going to use another piece of tape just so I don't get any of that tire ink where I don't want it. Now I am using Metropolis and Licorice. So I put Metropolis down first, and then I'm coming in with my Licorice, and I will concentrate on the bottom of the tire and the top of the tire. So it looks like we have a little bit of light shining on the back of that tire. I'm not even sure how noticeable it will be once this ink does dry, but we get an A for effort. So now I just noticed we need to bring back in our tailgate stencil and color in this little tiny area for our muffler. And I think for that, we'll just go back in with Licorice. There we go. And in all reality, you don't need the stencils. They do just make it a little more convenient for coloring in certain areas. So now I am bringing my Misti back in. And before I re-stamp this, because this does have so much ink on it, I am going to hit this with my heat gun for just a minute. And you can see that it's almost dry back here. But that alcohol ink, we've got a lot on there. Now we can put this back in our Misti and we will re-stamp. So we are going to heat emboss this. So I've got my VersaFine, but we also want to make sure that we get some powder on there so our embossing powder does not stick where we don't want it. So I've got my VersaFine. We will probably ink this up twice. This is always the scary part because you're never sure, okay, did I get that paper all the way to the edge? Is it in the same exact place as before? And it looks like it's perfect. For my embossing powder, I am using Hero Arts Clear, and we just want to make sure we get that whole thing coated. Then we'll bring in our heat gun and set that. So as soon as that image turns nice and shiny, you know that your powder is all set. I'm going to put that aside for a minute and let that cool, and I am going to get that pigment ink off of my stamp. I never like to leave pigment ink on my stamp. So I went ahead and I trimmed my panel a little bit. We will now be adding a little sentiment in here to our license plate. And this set has so many options. Miss you, love you, hot rod, see you later. There's just a ton of them in here. We will be using classic. We need one more magnet on there just to make sure it doesn't move. I again am coming in with my VersaFine. Then we can bring in our powder and emboss that sentiment. So our truck is all cooled from heat embossing. We can go ahead and bring in our dies. And these are the tailgate dies. There are also 2 additional pieces because you can cut out extra pieces and lay them on top of your tailgate and then have little items sticking out of the tailgate for decoration. But we're just making this a pretty simple card. I have already die cut my card base, and for that I just took a side folding card, turned it over on its side, and I cut that card base just like that. I did find that it is better to use hammer mill for your card base on this instead of the Nina. I prefer Nina because I like a sturdier card base, but it didn't cut as well. So we will be using the hammer mill, and this does line up pretty well. I am just taping it down in 4 different places, only because we heat embossed on it, and it did warp that paper just a little bit, and it cut out beautifully. We've got that perfect edge all the way around. So we've got our card base. We can go ahead and attach our truck to our card base, and I will just use liquid glue for that. So now we can go ahead and add our sentiment to our tailgate, and we are using the tailgate alphabet. And I love these letters because they're tall and narrow and they will fit perfect on there. So what I did, so I can line up my letters perfectly, I cut a piece of cardstock that is the same size as the tailgate, and I have attached that. I think you can see that. I have just attached that with some tape to a grid sheet. I am just going to line up my letters. Then we can bring in a piece of tape and pick those up. Then we will add some glue to the back, and that piece of tape just makes it super easy to pick those up. That way they don't move and they're perfectly lined up. And for my letters, I cut those out of Spellbinders Ebony, and I did cut them 4 times and stacked them because I want dimension. This is a simpler card, and I want some dimension in there. Then we can just bring this in, center that in our tailgate. I'm just going to hold that for a minute, and then we will gently peel off our tape. Then we can bring in some of our Spellbinders Onyx gems, and that card is done. I also added some little gems to my bumper where the bolts would go. I added some Alta New enamel dots to my tail lights. And I also went ahead and I colored the arms on my side mirrors so they matched the paint. And this card sits up. It is so cute. I just love that. So I also did one in blue. And here you can see my Copic wasn't as juicy as I would have liked. So my colors didn't blend real well. And that was the same issue I had with my red one. I really wanted to do a red truck, but I need to get some re-inkers. So that one I'm kind of putting aside for now. But I love how these came out. I also did one with the cab. So this is the tailgate, and then here is the cab set. And the cab dies are almost identical to the tailgate dies as far as the body of the truck goes. The cab dies just have all the sentiment dies that go with the stamp set. But I went ahead and I cut out a cab and a tailgate, and there really is no difference at all. So if you are not able to pick up one die set or the other, it doesn't matter because they are so close. I don't think it would make a difference, but these are just adorable. I love how they sit up. That is so cute. I will have everything I used today listed and linked in the description below. Please leave me a comment. Please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.